Frederick Douglass was a prominent American abolitionist, author, and orator. Born a slave, Douglass escaped at age 20 and went on to become a world-renowned anti-slavery activist. His three autobiographies are considered most important works of the slave narrative tradition as well as classics of American autobiography. Douglass's work as a reformer ranged from his abolitionist activities in the early 1840s to his attacks on Jim Crow and lynching in the 1890s. For 16 years, he edited an influential black newspaper and achieved international fame as an inspiring and a persuasive speaker and writer. Frederick Douglass was born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey in Talbot County, Maryland, possibly in February 1818. His father was an unknown white man. His mother, Harriet Bailey, was a slave. He was separated from her and raised by her elderly parents. When he was 7 years old, Frederick was sent to his master, Captain Aaron Anthony, at a nearby plantation. There he first met a brother and two sisters. He later recalled that sadly slavery had made his brother and sister strangers to him. The following year, Frederick became a servant to Hugh Auld, a relative of Captain Anthony who lived in Baltimore, Maryland. Frederick persuaded Auld's wife to teach him to read, but Auld believed that the slave should not be educated and stopped the lessons. White playmates helped Frederick, and he soon learned to read very well. His reading of a book of speeches denouncing slavery and oppression deepened his hatred of slavery. In 1835, Frederick was put to work at a farm near Thomas Auld's plantation. In the following year, he and the other slaves plotted to escape to the north. Their plan was discovered, and they were jailed. Frederick was released and sent back to Baltimore, where he became the ship's caulker. Once he was attacked by white workers who resented the competition of slave laborers. They went unpunished because the testimony of black witnesses would not be admitted as the evidence in court. For a while, in 1838, Hugh Auld allowed Frederick to find his own jobs and keep part of his wages. On September 3rd, 1838, Frederick escaped from slavery. With identification borrowed from a free black seaman, he traveled to New York City. In less than a day, he was a free man. Soon after, he sent for Anna Murray, a free black woman from Baltimore. They were married and settled in New Bedford, Massachusetts. There, he took the name Frederick Douglass. Douglass read The Liberator, an anti-slavery newspaper published by the white abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison. He eagerly attended anti-slavery meetings. In 1841, at an anti-slavery convention, Douglass described his slave life in a moving speech that began his career as an abolitionist. Douglass became an agent of the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society, and in this capacity lectured to large assemblies. Soon he became unhappy with merely retelling his memories of slave life. He later said, "I did not entirely satisfy me to narrate wrongs. I felt like denouncing them." In 1841, Douglass campaigned in Rhode Island against a proposed new state constitution that would deny blacks the right to vote. In 1843, he traveled through the East and Midwest to address a series of anti-slavery assemblies known as the 100 Conventions. In his travels, Douglass was sometimes attacked by pro-slavery mobs and often met with discrimination. Once he refused to leave his train seat for a segregated car and had to be forcibly removed. Many of Douglass's followers were so impressed by Douglass's appearance and personality that they could not believe that he had ever been a slave. He had never revealed his former name or the name of his master. To dispel doubts about his past, he published an autobiography in 1845, The Narrative Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. Fearful that it might lead to re-enslavement, Douglass fled to Great Britain, where he lectured to arouse support for the anti-slavery movement in the United States. English Quakers raised money to purchase his freedom, and in 1847 he returned home, now legally free. That year, Douglass founded a new anti-slavery newspaper, the North Star, later renamed the Frederick Douglass newspaper, in Rochester, New York. Unlike Garrison, he had come to believe that political action, rather than moral persuasion, would bring about the abolition of slavery. Douglass also resented Garrison's view that blacks did not have the ability to lead the anti-slavery movement. By 1853, he had broken with Garrison and become a strong, independent abolitionist. In 1859, Douglass refused to join the white abolitionist John Brown in his attempt to seize arms for a slave revolt from the Federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, now in West Virginia. But Douglass did not reject violence as a weapon against slavery. He believed that it can never be wrong for the imbruted and whip-scarred slaves or their friends to hunt, harass, and even strike down the traffickers in human flesh. Douglass was accused of helping Brown and was forced again to flee to England. After the Civil War, Douglass held several federal offices. In the District of Columbia, he was appointed to the Legislative Council in 1871. He became a U.S. Marshal there in 1877 and the Recorder of Deeds in 1881. From 1889 to 1891, he served as a minister to Haiti. Douglass fought for the passage of the 15th Amendment to the Constitution, ratified in 1870, which gave blacks the right to vote. Later, he saw that Southern blacks had returned to virtual slavery under a farming system called shared cropping. He urged that the federal government grant land to the blacks. Douglass earnestly supported women's rights as well. In 1848, at the first Women's Rights Convention in the United States, he had demanded that women be allowed to vote. On the day of his death, February 20th, 1895, in Washington, D.C., Douglass attended a convention for women's suffrage. Douglass proclaimed beliefs in justice for the oppressed in the North Star. Right is of no sex, truth is of no color. He wanted blacks to lead the struggle for the civil rights. Frederick Douglass and Connecticut. Douglass had significant ties to Connecticut. He visited Hartford many times, spoke to appreciative crowds, and dined with elected officials. Douglass even had his portrait taken by a local photographer and is in his autobiography published in 1882.